Well, good morning to you. I'm so grateful that you're here today, spending part of your time, your Labor Day weekend with Cornerstone. If you're watching online, welcome, especially if you're at a campground. You picked a great weekend to do that. So grateful that we had just a beautiful morning, right? I mean, it's been awesome with the weather that we've had, but just last week, we had a lot of devastation with tornadoes and some issues not only in West Michigan, but around the world and even in our own country between flooding and hurricanes and wildfires. And many of you have asked, is there something that we can do? So what we've done is we've put together a couple QR codes that we're going to put up on the screen for you to get involved. And if you just take your camera, and if you're at home, you can do this as well. And you can link right there for national relief through UMCOR, which is part of the United Methodist Church. And click on that, and that'll take you to national relief. And there's also one that will show you that's local relief and giving you ways that you can do that. Even some ideas of some home kits that you can do to help people here in West Michigan. It's just a way that Cornerstone gives an opportunity for you to connect. And I just love that we have that opportunity. So there's great information at our guest services desk, and you can find it online too if you'd like to get involved a little bit more with helping out. It's really cool. Also, kids, your swag tags, make sure you have those. It's our last message. Yeah, right there. I love that. Holding that up because we're going to go into our last one of our Level Up series, which is week 5. Now, kids, I want to speak to you for a second. Adults, you can answer this as well. When you think of your favorite day of the week, what's your favorite day of the week? I heard Sunday. I heard Friday. How about Monday? Anybody love Mondays? Okay, so there's 2. All right. Well, I was one of those kids that loved Mondays. Here's the reason why. Because on Monday, it used to have my favorite show on TV. And it only aired on Mondays at 4:05 in the afternoon. And if anybody knows this show, you and I are living in Geeksville together. Does anybody ever remember a show called Starcade? Okay, I'm the only member. I'm the mayor of Geeksville then. All right, let me share about Starcade. Starcade was this video game show that kids would compete on, and they'd have to answer trivia questions. And if they got the answer correct, their little reward was they'd go and play the really big video games like you'd saw at the arcade and roller rinks. And so as a kid, I would run off the bus, I'd run down, get my box of Cheez-Its, and I'd run and watch Starcade. That's what I did. Some kids were going to play kickball. I was going to watch Starcade. Anyway, I'm Tommy, and I'm a geek. Welcome to week 5 of our Level Up series. But on Starcade, I have to tell you, this is kind of cool, because what they would do is they would introduce some of the newest video games that you'd be doing. And I never forget, when they would show one of your favorite video games. It was always like this magical moment. And we, in 2023, know that video games are still a huge thing. Like last year alone, $221 billion was spent on video games. This year, they expect it to be $250 billion on video games. So even if you're caught in the 80s, I understand, it's still a big deal today. Now, there's a lot of debate as to what your favorite gaming system was. Some people are diehard Xbox. Some say it's PlayStation. Some are old school Nintendo. Okay. Old school right there at the age of 11. But this was my old school game. This is what I used to play. This is where I was at. My video game system looked like this. Space Invaders Atari. It was my greatest Christmas gift. I got an Atari system. Or even before that, I remember playing on this game system, if anybody remembers this. That is so realistic. It just looks like a pickleball court, right? Pong. So let's go back to Starcade, because on Starcade, which I'm the mayor of Geeksville, on Starcade, I remember when they introduced the original Mario game. The original Mario video game, which was not just Mario, it was Donkey Kong. Okay? This is where Mario got his start. Now, I'm almost scared to mention this because I don't want you to have this as the only thing you walk away from church. but it's bound to happen. Do you know why it's called Donkey Kong? Because there's never a donkey in this video game, by the way. When the creator of the game was trying to figure out, he said he wanted like the gorilla to be King Kong, but he's also stubborn like a donkey. Hence, Donkey Kong. Again, if this is the only thing you walk away from, I'm scared. But if somehow you can say, I learned that at church, you may win some people over. Anyway, in Donkey Kong, there were not any little mushrooms to get past Donkey Kong to save the princess. But today, Mario's got a whole bunch of cool things. You can rack up coins for extra lives. You get a mystery box for invincibility. You can eat a mushroom and supersize. And then there was even something you could do to make Mario mini. And it became a small little mini. And anytime I got that mini mushroom, I'm like, oh, I don't want to be the mini size. But actually, that mini Mario allowed you to do some pretty cool things. You could jump farther. You could get to some levels that you can't get to when you're normal size. And on the original Mario, Super Mario, the easiest way to get past that monster beast Bowser was to be the mini Mario and save the princess. So it proves that being small has some advantages. Which brings us to today's big idea. When I feel small, God is big. Now, to understand this idea and how we're going to wrap up Starcade into the Bible, as only Cornerstone can, we're going to look at a story about our main character, who's part of the swag tags that kids I know you have. His name is Gideon, and you can hear his story and read his story in Judges, specifically chapters 6 through 8. Now, judges were men or women that God chose to be leaders of Israel. Long before the times of kings, there were judges. Now, that cycle continued to play out in the book of Judges, and I want you to listen to how this happened. The people of Israel would turn away from God. They're overpowered by an enemy. They cry out to God, God, we are sorry, we repent. God sends them a judge to rescue them. It's amazing how some things never change after all of these years, right? They fall away from God again, and then the cycle continues. So that's what happened all over again, and this is where the story of Gideon kicks in. It's in Judges chapter 6, and we're going to pick it up here in verses 1 through 4. Here's how it begins. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern people invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. These Midianites were ruthless. We're talking for 7 years this cycle continues. The Midianites come into Israel at the time of harvest. They steal everything, destroy everything in their path. And this is where God calls Gideon to rescue Israel. Now, a little bit about Gideon. He's not your usual hero, okay? He's not big, strong, tough. He's kind of like a farm boy, really, who, like all the other Israelites, wanted nothing to do with the Midianites. But in this story, we're going to find out together the bottom line play over and over and over again, that when I feel small, God is big. So here's where we find Gideon as the story continues. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. Now, when the story of Gideon comes up in church, maybe you're familiar with this story, with the big battle of the Midianites, or the testing of God with this thing called the fleece that Gideon does. And we're going to touch a little bit about that today. But if you want to know specifically more, that's in Judges 6 through 8. But again, we'll touch on that a little bit today. But I really want to look at something that we often skip in this story, and it's something that we just read. overlooking in Gideon's story. And it's in what we just read. It says, when the angel of the Lord found Gideon, he was in a wine press threshing wheat. Now, it might not mean a whole lot to you today, but I want to give you a little bit of idea of what this mindset of what Gideon was dealing with in his mind when God went looking for him. So this is what an ancient threshing floor looked like. So you'd see at the time of the harvest, farmers would gather their wheat at the threshing floor. And during the day, it's windy. And here's what they would do. They would take the wheat and they'd throw it up into the air. The wind comes and whisks all the chaff away, and the wheat, or the good kernels, would fall to the ground, and they'd scoop them all up and gather them. Now, the thing with the threshing floor is you can see it's wide open. You can see all the hills in the area, so everybody sees it, including your enemies. But where did we just find Gideon? He was in the wine press. You know where the wine press is? It's underground. So Gideon's like hiding, trying to do this stuff back here. And then he comes over and, if I stay over here, maybe nobody will see me. That's where Gideon is. He isn't out there. He's hiding in the wine press. He's afraid. He's terrified. And this is where God calls him. At a moment where you would think, this is completely embarrassing. I can't even be out where the other people are. God calls him at that moment. I mean, Gideon probably looks back years upon his life and goes, yeah, I'll tell you where I was when God called me. It's kind of embarrassing. But that's how God calls him. It's almost laughable. But how many times did you ever in your life feel small because you were afraid? I mean, sometimes money problems make you feel pretty small. You're drowning in debt, and it's not getting any better. Or things just really look tough from a situation that you're going through, and you have absolutely no idea how you're going to make ends meet. And for you, it starts to become embarrassing. Or something unexpected just pulls out of the safety net that you've been working so hard for. Maybe it's something that happened, or maybe something that you caused to happen. Whatever it is, you're embarrassed by it. And you're like, I think I could hide in that hole or that hole so nobody finds out. Sometimes it's the fear of the unknown. I talked to a friend not too long ago who was waiting for news about her parent, as her parent was waiting to hear from the doctor about a diagnosis. That fear of the unknown was crippling. Like every time the phone went off, is that the text? Is that the call? This friend found out that the parent was diagnosed with cancer. That waiting period just kept going and going. Or it's maybe dealing with something else that's a moment-by-moment situation. Just this week, I spoke with someone whose spouse had a stroke. And it's been moment by moment. And that fear of the unknown, of the what's next. Maybe it's an unstable job situation. The downsize rumor starts going around. It's those moments that kind of grip us with fear. They put us against the wall and feel like, I don't know what's going to happen next. Well, that's where God found Gideon. And it's in those moments that we need to remind ourselves, when I feel small, God is big. You'd probably think that God would just move on and pick on someone else, not this little farm boy who's scared, right? But look at what happens next. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." I mean, Gideon's got to be thinking, are you serious? Are you kidding me? Mighty warrior? You see, God saw Gideon trembling and hiding in that fear that grips so many of us. And yet, what does God call him? Yeah, mighty warrior. Mighty warrior. Aren't you just glad that God sees you differently than how you see yourself? Aren't you glad that God sees you differently than others see you, right? I mean, have you ever looked in the mirror? Sorry if I get choked up. Have you ever looked in the mirror and just thought, I don't think I can do this? I don't have what it takes for this job. I don't have the giftings and abilities that they have. Or kids, you think, why am I going out for this team? I can't do what they do. There's always a million excuses. I'm too young. I'm too old. But the truth is that God sees more in us than we see in ourselves. In preparing for this message, I didn't expect this part to be in this until just almost 24 hours ago. I'm training for the Chicago Marathon, which is 26.2 miles. That's a marathon. And yesterday I did a training run up to 20 miles. I don't say that to go, wow, you're the man. I say that because at mile 18.25, I remember looking at my watch and I said to my friend, I'm done. I'm tanked. And my friend looked at me and said, come on, you got this. I know you got this. We can do this. Let's do it. You see, my friend saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. It gave me the confidence to finish that extra 2 miles. Now that said, during the marathon, I still have another 6.25 to run. And guess what now I'm thinking in my mind is, how am I going to do that? And there are people that will probably look at me and say, man, if you felt like that at 18, how are you going to feel at mile 25? Those naysayers start to come into your life, and you thought those were your champions. You thought those were the people that had your back. And that's not just training for a marathon. That's anything. That's your job. That's your everyday life. That's the team. Making the team of like, oh, yeah, well, I'm on this team. What team did you get picked for? Sometimes even people in your own family, sometimes people even in our own church become enemies. I mean, in fact, it's interesting. The Midianites were actually cousins of the Israelites. I mean, they're like family. And yet these family members were oppressing Israel. Years ago, one of my boys came home from school toward the end of the school year, and he said, hey, Mom and Dad, the teacher said that they're getting rid of the hermit crabs in the aquarium. And so I said that we could take it, which means, hey, Mom and Dad, you get to take care of the hermit crabs, right? So we bring everything home, we set everything up, the hermit crabs are in there, and we realize there's no lid on the aquarium. And so my son says, you don't need a lid. And I said, well, of course you need a lid. I'm not going to get these things out. He goes, no. Here's the deal, that if the crabs start crawling out, the other crabs grab them and pull them back down. You don't need a lid for an aquarium, for hermit crabs. And I thought, isn't that like life? Just when you think you're breaking through the mold, someone comes and sucks the life right out of you and goes, you can't get out of that. What are you doing? Right? I mean, they're some of your closest friends. I find it very interesting that there's a lot of crabby people. They don't want to see you succeed. They don't want to see you keep moving on. You're blessed and they're not. And they're like, oh, you come back down to my unblessed world. They suck the life right out of you. Sometimes, though, it's our own poor self-image that causes this. It's the way that we see ourselves. But again, God doesn't see us the way that we see ourselves. God doesn't see us the way that others see us. And I don't know what stage of life you're in, but maybe you have this going on, that maybe your parent has never seen the good in you that you do. They only see the things you do wrong. Maybe you're overlooked at work and you can't figure out why this bozo keeps moving on and you're stuck here. I don't know what the situation for you is. Maybe you've never measured up to your sibling and you feel like I'm not good enough and you hide in the wine press. There's a lot of things that can cloud the way that we see ourselves. A lot of things. So back to Gideon in the press, hiding for his life. And the angel of the Lord appears to him and calls him a what? Yes, a mighty warrior. He's hiding, remember. I think if I'd been Gideon that day in the wine press, I'm like, are you talking to me? Is there someone here I don't see? Because this is not me. But God saw something in Gideon that nobody else saw, including Gideon himself. Now, you can't control what other people think of you, but it is amazing what happens when your mind starts telling you, maybe I can do this. Even when you don't feel like you're number one, God is there by your side, cheering you on. He's like, yeah, you can do this. You can do this. I've got your back. Even if you're like this small fish in this huge pond, God's got your back. And to prove that, I want to share something with you. Tracy Bowers, who's the director of outreach here at Cornerstone, her son felt like a small fish in a big pond. His name is Brady. And just this year, Brady competed in the National Spelling Bee. This is the one that you see on TV. Brady was on the spelling bee, competed, and I want you to hear the perspective of what he was on with the journey and what he walked away with.
Striking. Can you just start by telling us your name?
Okay, I'm Brady Bowers. I went to Washington, D.C. for the National Spelling Bee, and there were a lot of really good spellers there and some great spellers, and it was a wonderful experience. I feel like on the inside, I am much more nervous than I am on the outside. When you are just watching on TV, it seems like everybody is so cool and calm, but on the inside, I'm freaking out not knowing what word I'm going to get. And I was practically sweating on the inside, if you could imagine that. I'll pray before I even get on the stage. I'll pray when I'm on stage. I'll pray before I get my word. I'll pray when I'm getting my word. I knew that I'd support here, halfway across the world, right in Washington, D.C., here in Michigan. My school supported me a lot, and the church has supported me too. I talked with Pastor Alex about my spelling bee journey as well, and a lot of other people. So knowing that people were praying for me and cheering me on was very awesome. If someone was having a tough time and I need to encourage them, I would likely say there's light at the end of the tunnel. There are people caring for you. Life is hard, change is hard. There is light at the end of the tunnel, knowing that God's there supporting them. Somebody's got your back. You can do this. God has your support, no matter what. If it's family death, if it's business problems, whatever the situation is, there's somebody there for you. I've recently done some activities that I normally wouldn't do just because I wanted to try something out of my comfort zone. And if I'm nervous, I'll just be like, it's not the bee. It can't be as stressful as the bee. Knowing that God is always with you and always supporting you, always cheering for you, is very helpful, very supportive, no matter what you're going through.
I will probably be using that sweating on the inside phrase. I love that. It's so true, but he's willing to try something new, even when he's afraid. He was afraid, but he said it's not going to be as tough as the bee. More proof that when you feel small, God is big. God is big. I'm so proud of Brady. So as Gideon's story continues, I want you to know he's still not 100% sure on this. And you've been in that situation too. I know you have. Even if the doctor has said, I think it's treatable, let's go on this. You're not like, I'm going to be great. You're like, okay, let's do this. So Gideon tests God a couple times. And this is the story of the fleece that maybe you've heard in Gideon. And it's where you hear that phrase, I don't know, put a fleece out there. Give God a fleece. The quick story is Gideon takes this fleece and puts it out and says, make the fleece dry and everything else wet. God does it. Gideon says, that's not good enough. Let's try it tomorrow. Make the fleece wet and everything else dry, God. So God does it again. And Gideon's like, okay. Cool, right? But that's so us, right? God gives you what you believe is that, okay, here's your moment. It's your green light. And you're like, I still don't know. I still don't know. So you can read more about that story in Judges chapter 6 through 8. I encourage you to read it. I sometimes think God gets a kick out of how we live this life. But anyway, finally back to Gideon. So he's like, all right, let's go. He accepts the challenge and gathers up his battle army, 32,000, ready to go to battle. He's like, okay, I think we can do this. I think we can do this. But the story doesn't tell us this till the end, that the battle on the other side, the Midianite army was more than 132,000. 32,000 to 132,000. Not great odds, right? But still, Gideon shows up for battle. And here's what happens in Judges chapter 7. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me. Therefore, tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain and go home. So 22,000 of them went home, leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. Now, I'm sure Gideon's probably thinking, well, I'm glad I wasn't the only terrified one. But he wasn't expecting that. But the plot thickens. But the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. Then there's this weird thing, and sometimes God just does things in ways that we can't explain. So he tells Gideon, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go down to the stream and drink out of the water. And what you're going to do is you're going to find who's really your people. So those that drink water from their hands, those are your battlers. Anybody that kneels down and drinks out of the stream like a dog, send them home. Okay? So they do that, which means that 9,700 of them knelt down and drank like a dog, leaving him with just 300 people. 300 versus 1,000 or 132,000. Again, how would you feel? Probably pretty defeated before you even start, right? But how many times have you ever felt like this? Thinking that you've got it all together when suddenly things just start to fall apart. Maybe for you, it's some addiction that you thought, you know what, I finally got it under control. Bam! The downfall happens and you stumble. It's a temptation that you thought, I think I'm over this. It's been a while. And then suddenly you find yourself stuck in it for a day, 2, 3 weeks. Or you finally have your money in order after all your hard work. And then the washing machine breaks. And then the water heater goes out. And if that's not enough, the repair engine light comes on the car. It's one thing after another. Or maybe it's something that's going on with a personal situation with health or with the loss of somebody that's near and dear to your heart. See, the point of this story is not to say that God's got you set up for failure. It's to remind you that when we and you are at your absolute weakest, God is always at his strongest. It's that moment that when we feel small, God is big. So with Gideon and his small little army, God says and declares, we're ready for battle. And it picks up in Judges 7. The Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. Again, you can read this and go, wow, this is a great story. But I mean, literally imagine if this is the battle that you're in. So here's how the story ends. Gideon is still unsure because remember, he's afraid. And I love this. God instructs them, go to this guy's camp. Go out in the middle of the night and go by their camp. So Gideon and his men go out by their camp, the Midianites' camp, and overhears the Midianites talking. The Midianites are afraid because they believe that God is on their side, the Israelites' side. So now Gideon gets this information. He's like, okay, yeah, let's go. They're afraid. And boom, suddenly, before the sun comes up, all this information is gathered, and they're equipped to go out to battle with their arsenal. Here's the arsenal: a jar of clay, a torch, and the mighty horn. That's the arsenal, not one weapon. And here's how the battle went. The three companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars. Grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. When the 300 Israelites blew their ram's horn, the Lord caused the warriors in the camp to fight against each other with their swords. Yeah, right? That's a crescendo moment. Like, are you kidding me? They didn't even have to fight. They didn't do anything. The battle belongs to the Lord. And from there, Gideon's army chased the Midianites out into the valley. Israel put their faith in God again, and all because of this young farm boy who was scared to death, who thought he was nothing, trusted God, showed up when the odds were completely stacked against him to the battle. Now, I have no idea what odds you feel like you're up against. Maybe the first week of school was horrible. Maybe you're waiting for the text of a diagnosis. Maybe you're waiting and longing for a strained relationship to come back. I just talked to somebody this week whose spouse has left, and he's left raising his two kids, and yet they are believing that God is going to restore their marriage. It seems like incredible odds against their family, but they're standing on the promise of God. Just show up for the battle and let God do the work. Again, I don't know what your odds are, but I want you to just have that confidence. This dude, the mighty warrior, was hiding. He was afraid. The whole time he was afraid, but suddenly he gets the information that they're the ones that are afraid. Sometimes it's the voices in our head that are our biggest enemies, telling you something that you're not, when you really need to know that God says, "You are mine." God sees something in you that you do not see in yourself. God sees something in you that right now you cannot see in yourself. When you're at your weakest, when you're in your hiding spot, that's when God will show up the most. When I feel small, God is big. Next week, Pastor Ken is going to be leading Starting Point, which is your opportunity to dive in a little bit deeper to a relationship with Jesus, just after the 11 o'clock service. All of our small group studies are going to be kicking back with our fall series is kicking in. Kids, confirmation is coming where you can say, okay, I'm in. I don't understand this whole thing. I'm kind of scared about it too, but I'm in. Let's go. There are so many ways to get plugged in. Just repeat that phrase to you over and over to yourself this week. When I feel small, God is big. Lord, thank you for this incredible story of this mighty warrior who probably someday when we get to talk to him, we'll laugh on his situation where he was hiding. But Lord, so many of us are hiding, afraid of what you're calling us to, knowing that there's a great opportunity, but maybe we're afraid to take a step in a relationship, in a job, in a team, in a friend. But God, you are big. Thank you that you see us so much different than we see ourselves. And today, for anybody who is struggling to see themselves as worthy, to see themselves as loved in a way that we don't understand, God, reveal yourself to us in Jesus' name. Amen.